Welcome back to 843 TV. Joining us now is Sally Krebs with the town of Hilton Head Island. Welcome, Sally.
Thank you very much.
Sally, you are the Sustainable Practices Coordinator. Tell us about what that means. What do you do? How does that help the town?
Well, sustainability is a very important part of Hilton Head Island. We've been a green community for a long time, and now we're trying to become sustainable, which means that we not only think about environmental issues, but we also bring in social and economic issues. And it's all aimed at making our quality of life here good, even better than it already is, and also about leaving a better world for our children and grandchildren.
Clearly very important to our community, and the foundation of Hilton Head Island has been on just preserving the nature. So the beach is a big part of that. I understand that you're working on some programs that are focusing on the birds. Tell us a little bit about those.
So we have two threatened species here on the island as far as shorebirds go, and they're called the red knot and also the piping plover. Those two birds are migratory birds. They only spend the winters here on Hilton Head. They don't nest here. They both nest much further north. Those birds are the birds that we have to monitor to see how their populations are doing, because we are working and have been working in at least critical habitat for the piping plover on the beach. So back in 2011, 2012, we were doing the Port Royal groin project, where we put a big groin in the ocean to help to slow the longshore currents and build sand up on the beach. And that was, we were actually working in the habitat that those birds use to feed and rest. And so we were required by our permits to do monitoring of those birds to see how their populations were doing and how that activity might affect them. We're now in a island-wide beach nourishment project, and same issue. We've got to make sure that those birds are protected and that they do well throughout this process.
So when you talk about the shorebirds, specifically, which kind of shorebirds are you actually monitoring? Can you tell us a little bit more?
Okay, so we monitor piping plovers and red knots. Piping plovers are little sparrow-sized birds that come from three different populations in the United States: the Great Lakes population, the Northern Great Plains, and the Atlantic Coast population. We get all three of those populations at least passing through Hilton Head. Some of them remain on the island. We get about 15 to 18 birds on average that spend the winter here on Hilton Head.
So Sally, why does the town feel it's important to monitor these birds?
Well, like I said, it's a requirement of our permits for beach nourishment, because we are in their habitat and we are disturbing them by doing the work that we're doing. However, long term, it's a really good thing, because the studies that we've been doing on the invertebrate population, the stuff they eat, the little stuff that lives in the sand, shows that not only do we increase the habitat they have for resting on the beach, which is called roosting, but we also increase the preferred prey items that they have that live out in the sand flats and the mud flats by doing this.
Okay, and we're talking specifically now about piping plovers and red knots, and you've shared with us some information about that. Through your research and through your monitoring, what are some of the, I guess, most interesting things that you've been finding out about these birds?
Well, one thing that we thought was really interesting is that when we did the groin project in Port Royal Plantation back in 2011 and 2012, we expected that all the trucks that were hauling rocks out to build the groin would disturb the birds that were roosting on the beach, resting on the beach, and those birds did not move. They stayed in the same area, which was just a short distance from where those trucks were coming and going. And we're talking about loads, tons of rocks, maybe 12 or 14 trucks a day coming through there. They also tended to want to feed in the areas where the sand was being put up on the beach. And we think the deal was that we were churning up a lot of the stuff that lives in the sand and putting it up on the sand so that it was available to those birds. And so they were not only the piping plovers and the red knots, but everybody was there. And it was like a banquet table.
Sure.
For
Jubilee.
So we thought that was really interesting, because we would have predicted that it would have been just the opposite.
Sure.
This is just really fascinating to me, that just in these couple of species, there's so much interest in so many things. Tell us about this. You mentioned about the migration. Tell us about how far they migrate.
Well, it varies with the piping plover, but For red knots especially, most of them breed in the Arctic, and they migrate as far as Tierra del Fuego.
Wow,
And
that's
so
amazing.
Those birds that go from the Arctic to Tierra del Fuego are flying about 20,000 miles
Wow.
round trip.
Yeah.
Every
Isn't that
year.
something? That's
Every
amazing.
year. And these are little robin-sized birds. They're not large birds.
And to me, it's even fascinating that there's individuals that just focus on those specific birds and study that. That's just really neat.
Let me throw something else in that's kind of cool about red knots, and kind of sad at the same time. So red knots, during this massive migration that they make, they stop and eat, as you might imagine. They have to keep that energy up for the flight. They stop in Delaware Bay in particular and gorge themselves on horseshoe crab eggs. The horseshoe crabs breed at the time that these birds are coming through. Well, since the 1980s, the population of horseshoe crabs has decreased by 80% due to overharvesting for both the medical industry and for bait for other fisheries. But also, during that same time period, the red knot populations have fallen by 75%. So they really rely on those horseshoe crab eggs as a major source of energy for that migration and breeding cycle that they're going through. So a lot of scientists who study the horseshoe crabs think that the red knot populations will not recover until the horseshoe crab populations recover.
And Sally, real quickly, for those viewers who are interested in helping these birds, what are some of the practices that we can do to help?
Okay, make your best effort to walk around groups of birds on the beach so you don't disturb them. They don't waste energy by flying constantly. Don't let your dogs chase them. Pick up your trash when you're leaving the beach and deposit it in the correct containers. Just common sense things, just respect them basically is what you need to do.
Good stuff. Sally, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
And stick around for one more segment of 843 TV.